Nigeria participated in World War II as a British colony in September 1939, following the government's acceptance of the United Kingdom Declaration of War on Nazi Germany and entering the war on the side of the Allies. It was a key country in the African theater, a critical part of the Allied strategy in Africa. In addition to its importance on the staging point in Africa, several Nigerian infantry regiments were raised to serve British Empire in campaigns in Africa and Asia. 45,000 Nigerian soldiers served in the British Armed Forces in Africa and Southeast Asia, and Nigerian regiments formed the majority of the 81st and 82nd West African Divisions of the British Army. Nigerian soldiers fought in most notably Burma and India. Continuing pre-war policies, none of the commanding officers of the Nigerian Corps were from Nigeria, but were selected from around the British Commonwealth until the first Nigerian officers were selected towards the war's end. Nigerians' involvement in the war fueled the struggle for independence from colonial rule, exposing them to the ideas of self-determination and independence. Hi guys, welcome to African Historic. On today's episode, we look at Nigeria's contribution to World War II. Many people don't realize that Nigeria, though still under colonial rule, played a significant part in World War II, from providing thousands of soldiers who fought bravely in distant lands to providing resources to the Allied effort. Nigeria's contribution went far beyond borders. Do stay tuned and enjoy the ride. Nigeria was involuntarily sucked into World War II, which spanned from 1939 to 1945, giving its status as a colony of Britain. Britain's economic, industrial, military and air power were weakened by World War I, and thus, Britain was less prepared for a world war in 1939 than it had been in 1914. This, coupled with a quick succession of reverses in Europe, North Africa, the Mediterranean and the Far East, meant that Britain needed all support it could muster from its colonies to prosecute the war. Nigeria, one of Britain's biggest African colonies, did not disappoint. Britain mobilized Nigerian public opinion in its favor through insidious propaganda. Hitler was demonized as the Haybringer of darkness, and the war itself was presented to the public as between bondage, represented by Hitler, and freedom for humanity, represented by Britain and the Allies. Hitler's racist theories, his foul massacres in Poland, and the millions of Jews who died in his concentration camps and gas chamber made the oppressive and exploitative British colonial rule in Nigeria seem benign. Not surprising, Nigerians unanimously affirmed their loyalty to Britain and the cause of the Allies. Influential Nigerian politicians such as Nnamdi Azikiwe and Herbert Macaulay, hitherto critics of British colonial rule, reversed gear and appealed to all Nigerians to rally around the Union Jack. Revered royal fathers used the influence of their esteemed offices to urge all Nigerians to support Britain and the Allies. The response was infectious, and seemingly overnight, win the war organizations mushroomed all over the country, propagating the gospel of a holy war against the force of Satan. Verbal affirmation went hand in hand with concrete support. Barely a fortnight after the commencement of the war, the Nigerian War Relief Fund (NWRF) was launched due to the urging of Sir Bernard Budilon, Governor of Nigeria. The fund was for the provision of relief to victims of the war in Britain and other allied countries. While many soldiers signed up willingly, there were instances of conscription of Nigerian men, some as young as 16. A national committee to oversee and popularize the fund was formed and was backed up by local communities across the country. To the effort of the communities, donations soon began to flow into the fund from individual persons and corporate entities in all parts of the country. Entertainments of various sorts were staged to raise money for the fund. Some people donated voluntarily, while funds were also squeezed out of local communities, civil servants, and other people in colonial establishments through compulsory levies. Among the war relief and charitable organizations that benefited from the fund were those in Britain, Malta, China, Yugoslavia, Poland, Burma, Russia, Greece, Poland, and Finland. If you find this video worthwhile, please take out some time to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it goes a long way in supporting our efforts. Thank you. Now let's get back to the video. In addition to the NWRF, there was also the Win the War Fund, to which Nigerians contributed substantial amounts of money. Some provinces made additional donations to the British war effort for the purchase of weaponry. Nigerian government on its own part made substantial interest-free loans to Britain. The Home Office was aware that by sending colonial soldiers to Europe, it risked exposing them to radical political ideas which could eventually destabilize British rule in Africa, and African forces were therefore sent more commonly to Southeast Asia. The first Nigerian units to see combat in World War II served in British campaigns in East Africa. In 1940, the 1st West African Brigade was the first Nigerian unit to be deployed against the Axis powers in Kenya. A total of 9,000 West African soldiers fought alongside regiments from the Gold Coast, which is present-day Ghana, and other British colonial possessions in West Africa. At this stage of the war, Nigeria's troop contributions were relatively small and would not grow until the conclusion of the African campaigns of the war. Throughout the East African campaigns, Nigerian forces were organized at battalion level, and no whole divisions were created from Nigerian soldiers. Despite this, British officers reported being impressed with the capabilities of the Nigerian soldiers, of which their participation in the capture of Mogadishu and the rapid advance towards Dege Harbor can be highlighted. For many Nigerian citizens, the invasion of Ethiopia at the outbreak of World War II was the wake-up call to the Axis threat. Therefore, as early as 1935, Nigerian efforts on the home front were concentrated on raising funds to support the war effort in Ethiopia. After the success of the Allied campaigns in Africa, with the increasing need for soldiers to be deployed elsewhere, British command decided to form 2 divisions to fight in Southeast Asia. The 81st Division was formed from West African brigades, then deployed in 1943. In 1944, the 83rd West African Division was formed, then sailed to British Ceylon, present-day Sri Lanka, from the east coast of Africa. They then moved to Burma and took place in the 3rd Arakan Campaign in December 1944. The Allied forces in Burma faced a more experienced and entrenched Japanese imperial force. Despite this, through use of area resupply and effective use of the jungle terrain, the Allied forces were able to push the Japanese out of Burma. The jungle terrain forced the Allied forces to adopt new tactics and logistical strategies, a task which Nigerian forces excelled at. The 2 West African divisions uniquely used non-combatant soldiers as porters, auxiliary head carrying supplies and ammunition. While British units used traditional resupply methods, the African porters enabled the West African divisions greater mobility than even the famed Chinjit units native to Burma. The British units used heavy air superiority to great effect throughout the campaign, with the Royal Air Force RAF flying resupply missions which enabled Allied forces to effectively fight in the jungles. The 81st Division was initially deployed deep into the front, where it faced intense fighting for nearly a year before being relieved by the 2nd Division. By January 1945, the 82nd Division had reached Apuaka on the Colonial River, where they had been ordered to meet up with the 81st Division. From here, the 81st Division was initially intended to return to India for the rest of the refit, and the 82nd Division was to take up the 81st Division's role of engaging Japanese elements. The largest engagement of the campaign, fought by Nigerian forces, was the Battle of Myonyang, a swiftly executive operation to seize the town of Myonyang. Both Nigerian divisions were deployed to encircle the city, with the 81st Division due to return to India after the town's capture. After some fierce fighting on the outskirts of the city, the Japanese forces evacuated the city upon realizing they had been surrounded. The recapture of Myonyang was strategically important as the city lay on major supply routes for Japan. Actions of the Allied combatants ultimately forced the Japanese evacuation of the Mayu Peninsula, capturing areas which had been held by Japan for nearly 4 years. British troops continued to advance along the Maui Peninsula until the Japanese considered the area entirely. The involvement of Nigerian forces was critical for this campaign. In preparation for the outbreak of the World War, the colonial government secretly deployed several schemes to retain foreign exchange and ensure a supply of commodities necessary for the war effort. In 1939, as part of the plans of the Nigerian Colonial Administration, set up the Nigerian Supply Board to regulate trade and manage production. To ensure accelerated supplies to Britain's war industries by her West African colonies, Britain dispatched a resident minister of cabinet rank, Sir Swinton, to West Africa. That year, a series of defense regulations were instituted, granting vast power to the board and other administrators to control the distribution of imports and foodstuffs. In the early stages of the war, British commanders and colonial officials had not anticipated that Africa would be heavily involved in the conflict. After the rapid success of Germany's blitzkrieg in Europe, the British government declared that winning the war would require a supreme effort from every person in the empire. Part of this effort would include increasing production of wartime commodities, meanwhile drastically reducing the social spending, development, and imports of goods deemed non-essential. London also reversed its laissez-faire policy and set up the West African Produce Control Board, which it made the monopoly purchaser of Britain's West Africa's exports. The board fixed the prices, and it brought produce to farmers, invariably far below the open market prices. About 1,800 unwilling laborers were conscripted into the tin mines of Jos under appalling conditions and at low wages. Against the poor returns of his wages or wage labor, the Nigerian consumer was faced with escalating prices of imports arising from wartime scarcity. Additionally, direct taxes were increased on the population, a measure which will result in nationwide strikes in 1945 and 1947 against the continued enforcement of wartime legislation. Throughout the war, Nigerian attitudes towards colonial rule grew more steadily negative as the demands of the Nigerian War Relief Fund became harder to meet. The Home Office strongly encouraged and incentivized Nigerian miners and farmers to increase their output of raw materials. In particular, heavy demand was placed on rubber and coal. Nigerian women played a critical role in collecting the harvest of Nigeria's two largest crop exports, cocoa and palm oil. Farmers were forced to produce these cash crops instead of food for the duration of the war due to economic difficulties. At the outbreak of the war, the colonial government prohibited exports of cocoa and palm oil to Germany in order to deprive them of critical wartime goods. The government became the sole purchaser of all Nigerians' cash crops and lowered the prices to cope with wartime demands. As a result, the continuation of cocoa farming became highly difficult for some small rural farmers, many of whom abandoned their farms due to sustained years of producing a loss. As in many places throughout World War II, Nigeria experienced an acute shortage of food from the years of 1939 to 1945. Rationing was introduced and lasted as late as 1948 in some parts of the country. In order to produce basic items like salt, flour, butter, or tinned milk, a ration card was required. In addition to rationing, the government put restrictions on the movement of food within the country. For example, banning the movement of rice between Abeokuta and Lagos. Smugglers attempting to transport rice to Lagos were either fined or put on criminal trial for subverting the war effort. The media was used to propagate support for the war throughout the country. Radio broadcasts were relayed throughout the country, broadcasting programming from the BBC and local broadcasters. Newspapers like the Yoruba News brought information on the progression of the war in the Yoruba language as well as English. In both of these cases, the media was produced primarily in English, with Yoruba publications emerging later in the war. The aim of these outlets was fundraising for the Nigerian War Relief Fund. Nigerian soldiers who returned home after the war received little official congratulations for their involvement in the war. Upon successful completion of the Allied objectives in Burma, Nigerian troops were not involved in the victory speech by commanding officer General William Slim. Upon their return to Nigeria, a general frustration with the colonial administration and a renewed sense of national pride contributed significantly to the push for independence in post-war Nigeria. Throughout the war, Nigerians had fought under European officers, and it was not until 4 years after the war's conclusion that the first Nigerian officer was commissioned in 1949. Combined with the tensions which had emerged on the home front throughout the war, Nigeria pushed significantly for the principles of self-determination following the war. Like many nations following the end of World War II, wartime experiences inspired the population to campaign for independence. The Nigerian Civil War of 1967 was fought and organized by many veterans of the Second World War. The General Strike of 1945 had been credited as one of the defining moments of Nigerian history. The strike was orchestrated by trade unionists across the country and included delegates from farming, railway, mining, manufacturing, and teaching unions. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I would love to know your thoughts about Nigeria's efforts in World War II, how it affected Nigeria during the war and after the war. Please leave me your thoughts in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification button to get more content like this about African history. It's been Nando from AfriVerse Historic. See you in the next video.